Generally speaking, all the best remarks are always done off mic, and I would prefer that the indiscretions are part of what happens. And may I welcome you to the fourth Guitar Craft Seminar? This is Chris and Mark.
We came down to see the last recital.
You saw nothing.
But we will be down for the next one as well.
Tomorrow night at Chianti's.
One of the techniques, if you don't like engineers and you want to be nasty to them, and I'm not one of those freaks, what we do in the pretense of testing a microphone is to reach over or to scrape it. For those with headphones, it is an excruciating experience. Are you picking this up, Mark?
Yes, sir.
Good. Hello, Chris. Hello, Mark. Hello, radio listeners. We are currently within the barn at Claymont Court with the members of the fourth Guitar Craft course. And I'm reading a small article in Washington's Free Weekly, the City Paper, Volume 3, Number 11, March the 25th to March the 31st. I presume this is in 1983. And I was giving the music system lecture tour. And this only goes to show the levels of humiliation which a performing artist has to suffer. The headline is Fripped Out. This is how it begins. And it goes on in the first sentence to say, of the world's 3 significant composer-stroke-guitarists, 4 if one counts Richard Pinhas. Now Richard Pinhas is a French guitarist who's a friend of mine, who I first met while working in Paris at the Olympia with Brian Eno in May 1975, and Richard came up to me with his good lady to introduce himself. And we got to know each other a little better in later years, from about 1979 on. Of the world's 3 significant composer-guitarists, Fripp remains its most enigmatic. The situation is perverse and must pain Fripp. Yes, dear listeners. Who strives above all to speak clearly to his audience. Yet if this is Georgetown University lecture script performance on March the 17th cleared away some of the cobwebs, it also strung up new ones.
So,
this is a young piece of enthusiastic, genuine writing. You haven't even bought the end of this article. Yet at the peak of their popularity, and with 8 best-selling albums behind them, they weren't really best-selling. Some of them. The guitarist dissolved the Crimson, citing the massiveness of their touring entourage as part of a, quote, dinosaur civilization, unquote, akin to, quote, America or any huge worldwide power, unquote, doomed by very size to stupidity and so extinction. And then it goes on. The years after 1974 saw him collaborating with David Bowie, Brian Eno, Talking Heads, and most recently, Policeman, guess it? Policeman and Sons. He produced discs by the Roach Sisters, Darryl Hall and Peter Gabriel, of whom it says, himself a former dinosaur with Genesis. Not true. Gabriel was never a dinosaur. Led a punkish dance combo, the League of Gentlemen, and released a series of distinguished but baffling solo albums, which incorporated metrically fractured disco rhythms, insistently mathematical melodies in inventive modes, indiscretions, secretly taped conversations from outside the studio, and Frippatronics, a trance-like tone recycling system through which the guitarist could become a one-man electronic minimalist ensemble a la Terry Riley or Philip Glass. Now this is a nice quote. Here's a nice quote. It goes on. Against the advice of E.G. Management, which represents him, Fripp began touring solo after Prem Besides, E.G. argued, who wanted to see a guitar hero stroke pop star play squeaks into a machine? It was the Emperor admitting he had no clothes. And the quote I like is, well, Fripp replied, the Emperor has no clothes. That I like. That I like. And so began the least incumbent rock music talk of all time. Robert Fripp, his guitar, a few machines, and an automobile. They admit to mention Fred Schuckman, who was part of this. Fred Schuckman was the same man. And Fred was kind of fastidious, is one of it, wasn't he? And I once said to Fred's mum, in front of Fred, I said, is Fred picky? And she said, Fred's brother is picky. Fred is picky. And Fred was addicted to Dairy Queen ice creams. And I think it was White Tower burgers. It may not have been White Tower burgers, but it may have been. And Fred would get really excited at the possibility of approaching a Dairy Queen on the road and see a Dairy Queen miles away and we'd approach it. And anyway, Fred was part of that talk. I used to say to Fred would find a Dairy Queen and burger place and send a postcard to his mother. Dear Mum, I am a happy boy. Love Fred. And love Jennifer. Fred would be at the shows when I would be announcing this and describing him, and he'd come up to me and say, oh, you don't have to say this so much about glowing gently green in the dark. Anyway, Fred was on the tour as well. And then it says, and once again Fripp found himself a success. Good. And though advertised as a lecture, this is in Georgetown, Fripp's appearance at frescoed Gaston Hall had all the trappings of a rock concert, complete from the obligatory frisking before entry to the equally obligatory souvenir t-shirt sale. Now, it was not obligatory. I had to work very, very hard to get t-shirts on sale there and available. They said, contents, one small mobile intelligent unit. And we had a young roadie called Brad, very handsome blonde, very on young man, and he was a good hustler. And he would do the crowds outside. And he would go up and down the crowds with a whole armful of t-shirts like this, and go up and down. T-shirts, Robert Fripp t-shirts, personally touched by Robert, t-shirts. And people on the queue would say, has Robert really touched them? And he said, yes. And they'd buy them. So, under chandelier house lights, a mixed crowd, part Washington Project on the Arts, part partying undergraduate students, stared expectantly at a nearly empty stage. Behind it, an image of Madonnas and angels nestled between pillars of carved wood. This is true. I learned later it was a particularly Catholic university, which I didn't know. Fripp came on 18 minutes late to a standing ovation. Then spent 3 or 4 minutes fiddling with the dials of 2 coupled Revox tape machines. The house lights never dimmed. Noises began to be heard. Notes, in fact. Fripp's first piece. Fripp's first piece, untitled, unannounced, and never to be repeated, began with the trumpet-like tones of his Roland G300 guitar synthesizer, assembling themselves into a kind of pentatonic minor scale. Oh, how about this? Soon Fripp was layering glides down the neck of the guitar at higher and higher intervals. The effect was as if enormous glaciers of sound were toppling onto the audience, reforming at greater mass and toppling forward again. As the pain threshold approached, Fripp cut off the sound abruptly, dislodged himself from the guitar,
clipped a contact mic to his tie and crossed the stage to begin his remarks. The audience applauded enthusiastically. "What were you expecting tonight?" Fripp began. Somebody shouted, "Insight!" "To expect insight at $8 a ticket is optimistic," he answered. A serious and dry as gin discourse on, in quotation marks, tetrads, comma, and then the article comes to an end.
The rest of it may be in there somewhere.
Yeah.
That's possible.
Well, I think we've probably had quite enough of that. Good. All right. Well, is there something you'd like to ask us?
I didn't know I'd be addressing everybody.
But you're a professional interviewer, so you can guide us and lead us.
Let me explain first that I'm not a professional interviewer. When you were growing up, what were some of your influences, be they musical or artistic?
Well, one's life-forming experiences are generally before the age of 7. And by that age, one doesn't really categorize them into musical and or cultural and or the rest of it. For me, a very major turning point in my life as a musician was 20 turning 21. But to go back to when I began to play guitar, which was on December the 24th, 1957, when I was 11, I was tone deaf and had no sense of rhythm. But I wanted a guitar. I'm not quite sure why. And my parents and I went out shopping, and finally they bought for me a really horrible, nasty Egmont Frere acoustic guitar with an action which was so savage one couldn't actually depress a string above the 7th fret without pliers. And because of that, I developed a very, very strong attack, which took me many years to be able to modify. Many years. It was still hampering me 15 years later from this first year. Now, although I was tone deaf and had no sense of rhythm and had a really appalling guitar, within 3 months I knew this was going to be my life. Very strange. At the same time, I knew that I was going to take over my father's small real estate firm. So there were side by side these two entirely contradictory knowings. I knew this was my life. The guitar was my life. On the other hand, I knew that I was going to take over my father's small real estate firm in Wimborne, Dorset. And there were moments of acute conflict and tension when the two contrary knowings came into collision. And one was when I was 17 and I spent a week in Jersey on holiday with my sister. And I took my third guitar, which was not great, but it wasn't bad, a Hofler. And I had a week in which I could practice. And it was so wonderful. And I went back to England and I said to my mother, "Mum, I want to become a professional guitarist." And she didn't try to persuade me against it. She simply burst into tears. Now, my mother has always said I did not burst into tears. She may or may not have burst into tears, but I clearly remember that my mother burst into tears. It may not have been physical, I cannot say, but my mother convinced me she did not wish her son to be a professional guitar player. And being a dutiful son, I endured. I went on working for the next 2 years for my father. And in order to get away from Wimborne and enjoy life experiences, I went to to college to take A-levels and to go on to a university in London and take a degree in estate management. So I would return with appropriate life experiences about age 23 or 4 with a degree, and I could be a partner in my father's firm. But when I was at college, taking A-levels in economics, economic history and political history with special paper in Victorian social conditions, 1850-1900, all the questions which were coming uppermost in the relatively young Fripp mind were not likely to be answered by selling houses. I was paying my way through college by working in a Jewish hotel, the Majestic Hotel, with 3 very, very good jazz musicians. 2 of them are of a world class. I've never worked with anyone better. The third was merely on a national level, and the 4th was the band leader. And these musicians were good, and I learnt the trade from them. We played Jolsons, fast and slow, foxtrots, tangos, quick steps, and I was expected to play the twists. It was not called rock music, it was called the twists. So they would look up and say, "Got any new twists, Bob?" And the idea was the guitar plays the tune. So what I would do is I would take the tune and give it to the saxophone player and play the kind of rock riffs underneath. And they transcribed, they wrote out boots. Can you remember Nancy Sinatra's "These Boots Were Made for Walking"? The saxophone player wrote it out and I got my part. And it was in D flat. D flat. And I said to Alan, the saxophone player, we're not going to get the effect of the boom, 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 boom with me playing this in D flat. We're going to transpose it to E and you'll be in F sharp. And he said, fine. And transposed it there and then, zop, no problem. And we had it in E, with me playing chords. I then at this point wrote a piece of music called, 2 pieces of music. One was called the Psychedelic Drone Song, and the other was called the Spasmic Honk Song, which were simply vehicles to galvanize these superb players to play against a rock beat, because for them it was a twist. And they got honking, and that was good. Anyway, I was paying my way through college, playing the psychedelic drone song, the honk song, the slow Jolsons, the fast Jolsons, and all the rest, and cabarets on Sunday nights were good. We used to get some of the top charts from London. The very best players, Tubby Hayes parts, would come down and we'd be expected to sight read them because the top boys in London were reading these charts. For us to do it in the provinces, and me a guitarist of 18 and 19, was a challenge. It was good work. Meanwhile, I was at college and all these questions were coming up. And real estate was not going to solve them. So, driving home one night, having just taken the examinations, 2/3 of the way through the course at 2 weeks' notice, being something of a smart ass, I got the grades necessary and left college. But I was still doing the college, the Jewish hotel. And I drove home and put the radio on. And I had no idea what it was, this terrifying piece of music. And it was Day in the Life. They'd been playing Sgt. Pepper. And I came in halfway through the side and I had no idea what it was. And that wind up at the end, then the piano, boing. Terrifying, terrifying. And then, Hendrix, Are You Experienced? And then the Mail, a Blues Breakers album with Clapton, All My Love, chip, ding, 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 pish, ba-dum, ba-dum, bish, and then Dvorak's New World, the beautiful, beautiful quiet pentatonic section, and then the Bartok 6-string quartets. And I was galvanized. And since there were 6 months in between me going to university, I went to London, did the interview, had appallingly nasty gigs lined up in Acton, an appallingly nasty part of London, and to fill in the 6 months in between, I formed a group called Cremation. And it was wretched, but I got my mother, my mother and I would go out and we would shop locally for all these new materials in clothes shops, all these psychedelic patterns, and made me psychedelic trousers and psychedelic shirts. And I got these National Health spectacles and frizzed my hair up and blew lacquer on it. And bought a fuzz box and a more powerful amplifier and went out as part of Cremation, this unspeakably appalling three-piece band with Howard Pettridge on bass and vocals and Mike Owen on drums. And we bought a really, really cheap van which would only seat two, so three of us sat in the front with all the equipment in the back, small 500 weight, and we would drive off to gigs. And the front two tyres were bald, and if we moved above 32 miles an hour you would get a wheel wobble. And the group was so bad that when, after hustling for a couple of months, we got a gig in Bournemouth, I would be so embarrassed that people would come and see us, I had to cancel it. Actually, there was 4 months into it, and the group dissolved. But we would play the Hendrix tunes, Purple Haze, Foxy Lady, Hey Joe, the Mail, Clapton, Blues Breakers things. Oh, we would have them down. I would do all the Hendrix things, brum, brah, brum, brah, brah. And with this fuzz box, I would get the sustain. People would come up to me and say, how do you get that sustain? Because I played one note for a minute. Just hold on to it and just let it go. And that was quite meaty stuff for them. Early 1967, March, April 1967. But the group was so bad that I couldn't bear to be seen in it. So it was dissolved and Howard got very upset. But at that point, I had to give my life to it. Nothing else was possible. Nothing else was possible. So that was the big turning point. It was the decision to effectively leave my family in terms of the business, which my father retired shortly afterwards because he was really staying on for me to take on the business. And that was difficult stuff, as we all know, parents and so on. Nevertheless, I had to follow where I knew I should go. And if you're going to be a professional musician in England, you go to London. There's nowhere else. Whether you want to or not, you're going to go. And I heard the word Vic Allen. It was his pseudonym. His real name was Vic Merrifield. But Vic Allen was a local drummer and agent. And he was the one who told me that he couldn't give us any more work because the group had such a bad reputation. That was Cremation. He phoned me up and said, hey Bob, the Giles brothers are looking for a singing organist. Why don't you get in touch? Now, it may be at certain points in our life, fate reaches out a hand and directs us somewhere. Who knows? But no one in the right mind would offer me a job as a singing organist. So I called up and said, hi. And they said, well, why don't you come on down to the Beacon Royal Hotel and we'll work out. We'll try something. So I went down there and rehearsed with them, working on a Revox for a month. And I obviously had the job because no one else was there working with them. So I said to Mike Giles, after a month, as a joke, I said, well, Mike, have I got the job? And he rolled a cigarette, pulled bits of tobacco out the end, put it in his mouth, lit it, puffed on it a bit and said, well, let's not be in too great a hurry to commit ourselves to each other. So then we moved to London. Meanwhile, apart from doing the gigs at the Majestic, I was doing other hotels in Bournemouth as a member of an accordion trio. Douglas Ward and the fabulous Cordovox. It was an early electric accordion with two amplifiers and so-called stereo, and this wonderful foot pedal volume, but if you depressed it from side to side, it would alter the tone. so that it would sound like a Hawaiian guitar. And while playing long nights, 6, 7, 8 hour gigs at the Chewton Glen, to relieve the boredom, sometimes I would turn the volume on the guitar right off and just go to sleep and pretend to be playing. But every now and then I'd wake up and reach over and press this volume pedal so Doug would suddenly go down the semitone. Anyway, Doug got in touch with me and said, I'd been offered this job for Adrian Dante, who was an Italian ex-accordionist who is now an agent in London. I'd been offered a job at La Dolce Notte, which was an Italian restaurant in Jermyn Street, Piccadilly. Very, very fancy type stuff. And we need a quartet. And I said, I know the rhythm section, you got a guitarist, fine. But we're going up to back this singer called Moreno. So we would be the 4-piece, there would be Moreno, and the other half of the bill would be this Italian girl group. So the week before, we went up the week early and we're playing at the Dolce Vita in Frith Street. I bypassed the story of the audition we did for the Flower Pot Men and got the job. They had a hit record. We moved up to London, found we'd lost the job and moved back down 10 years after, got the job as a backing group. That I have not gone into. So we turned up, we were working the Dolce Vita, filling in. I was playing bass sometimes. I had no idea of the tunes, I'd never heard them before. One of the favourite was da da ya ta 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 ta, man and a woman ya ta ta ya ta 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 ta, and I had no idea about this tune, so I would play bass and so on. Now, on the Saturday, the final Saturday, before the Monday we begin at La Dolce Notte, and we're still at La Dolce Vita, Doug Ward, the accordion player, got horribly beaten up by 3 men on a roundabout in London. He was going around this roundabout in his sports car, and he was burnt up by this car. And Doug thought this was quite bad manners. So Doug stopped his car and stopped their car and got out to suggest to them that maybe they had been impolite in their driving habits. So these 3 big guys got out of their car and had a word with Doug. And they stomped all over him. And we went to visit him in hospital. And his jaw was held on to his throat like this. And he would eat food by sucking it through a straw with one of his teeth had been. Hi, Doug! Poor Doug. And where he was laying, because he'd been so stomped all over, he was in such acute pain because of the bruises that he was lying on, he would move. So he'd go, hi Doug, how you doing? And then he'd get up and move. Oh! And he'd find the other bruises he hadn't been lying on. And then, so Doug was not going to make this gig. His fingers, held on these little wire things. Oh, this was not good. So, instead of the Douglas Ward Quartet featuring the fabulous Cordavox, you had Mike Giles, Peter Giles and Robert Fripp turned up to back Moreno, this Italian singer, who was awful, very short, with a little black moustache. And I used to introduce him. In my psychedelic trousers, my mother made for me, in this very, very fancy and swish Italian restaurant in Piccadilly. Now, I just moved to London and I was very, very nervous, and we'd be on for 45 minutes or so and then off for 45 minutes. And I would spend all my free time in the bathroom. All of it. I would go down to the bathroom, close the door, and that would be my 45-minute break. Then I would look at my watch, see time was up, and get up and go up and join the other guys. Now, the changeover was this. There is the girl group playing 4-piece, 5-piece. And the idea, very clever, very subtle, they would play Blue Moon. And then the bass player would leave, and our bass player would move on, Pete Giles, and he would begin playing, and then their guitarist would leave, and I would walk on and begin playing, and then their drummer would leave, and Mike Giles would walk on, and no one would tell that the group had changed, because we were all playing Blue Moon. Great idea. All right. However, I would be up from the bathroom. Mike and Pete Giles would have set off across the floor, and there would be a crowd separating them and me, through which I would have to battle. So you'd have Blue Moon drum solo, Blue Moon bass solo, Blue Moon duet, and then finally I would join them as a trio. Now, Moreno would come on by the side of the stage after we played a few tunes in E. The bass drum, however, of the Italian girl group's drummer was tuned to E flat. So every time Mike hit the bass drum, it would be E flat. Every time we played it nice low res E. It was horrible. Anyway, there was Moreno waiting to come on, and I would say, get up the microphone in my psychedelic. Ladies and gentlemen, and now, yes, for your edification and your amusement, straight from Italy, all the way from Italy, at great expense for you, yes, let's hear it, please, it's Hot Lips Moreno! And this very short little Italian man with his moustache would come on and say, please, you no call me Hot Lips. Well, after 3-4 days of this, we realized that the agent was ripping us off. And we went on strike. On the Friday, I think it was. Renegotiated terms, went back on the Saturday, and then we were sacked. And I was out of work for the next 18 months. And that's how I became a professional musician.
In a nutshell.
As a practical working musician, material was needed for King Crimson, for example, and the band would go on holiday for 4 weeks. I would have 1 week. The rest of the 3 weeks I was writing music. And that's part of it. But I would rush around looking for ideas. Now, I don't rush around looking for ideas. They're there. All I have to do is be quiet and listen. And they present themselves. For example, you know in the North American Indian tradition, the man in the village who is responsible for music goes off to the spirit hill, and the spirits present the melody that's needed for the village at that time, and when he hears it, he goes back and takes it to the village. Well, on the first guitar craft course, the melody of the course presented itself. On the 4th day. And by the 5th day, everyone had their part. And we played a piece of music with 19 or 20 guitarists, a piece of music that had been presented to the course. Now, that may sound strange to you. I'm sure it doesn't to the radio listeners, though. Nevertheless, that's exactly, specifically, and precisely what happened. The music presented itself. This is not an ex-hippie speaking. I do not take drugs. I'm entirely sober, and this is very, very practical stuff. It is not otherworldly. It is simply what is available all the time to a person who has a relationship with music.
In 1981, you were quoted as saying you had charted plans for your work as far ahead as the 1990s.
All right, in 1978, I saw quite clearly the qualities which one would have to realize for the next 12 years. And I saw them in 3-year stages. And to go from one stage to the other, the first had to be completed. And this was quite clear to me. And it's a surprise at the same time to see, it's strange to see the future as it's being presented, validating itself as it unfolds. But I've begun to trust it more and more, because it's happening as I saw it. And so far I see up until the end of 1991. I see the work that has to be done. It's not guaranteed. I can see the qualities that have to be realized. It's not guaranteed.
Something that was part of your drive to 1981.
Yes.
Incline to 84.
Yes. And the word to characterize the 3-year period from 84 to 87 is network.
Do you ever see yourself working in that first division setup that you had spoken of before?
If my work demands that of me. My own view is that the top of the 2nd division, which is where I work now, permits the most freedom. There's one very considerable fallacy in the music industry, which is, when I'm successful, I'll play the music that I want to. That is completely wrong. You'll play the music that you want to when you play the music that you want to. If you wait until you're successful, you'll find that rather than get freedom, you will get more and more limitations. You can't play that. You have 18,000 people out there that want to hear, and so on. So being at the top of the 2nd division enables me to go into the 1st and back to the 3rd. It's, from one point of view, it's a demonstration of the Peter principle. Lawrence J. Peter's principle, one rises to the level of one's incompetence. He only knew 2 people who managed to remain below the level to which they could be promoted. One was a gardener, who was such a good gardener, people were always trying to promote him. But his accounts were in a complete mess. So he could never be promoted. You can't put someone in charge of a garden if their accounts were like that. He visited the gardener at home and found his household accounts were impeccable. But the fellow did not wish to be promoted. And the only way he could avoid it was by seeming to be sloppy with his paperwork. The other character Peter knew who managed to avoid being promoted beyond the level of his competency was Peter himself, who had a department at college. And they would come and try and promote him onto a large department and head of the school and so on. And what he would do, while being offered promotion, was giggle and try and light his cigarette by focusing the rays of the sun through a magnifying lens, continuing to giggle. And the person offering him promotion would kind of falter and then leave it. And the 3rd person, who he doesn't know, is myself. Now, if you look at the people I was working with 8 years ago, see how successful they are, something either has to be very, very wrong or very, very right that I'm at the position I am now.